As Old as Time, Part 2. Gaston. The tavern, so lively not that long ago, was now gloomy and cold. It was the hour for dark things, far past midnight, but not close enough to dawn for any hope of light. The fire was still burning in the enormous fireplace, banked low, more chastised and sullen than cheery. 3 lonely figures gathered around the single illuminated table, heads and shoulders bent close, despite the absence of anyone around to hear. Gaston was there, of course, his giant profile unmistakable, and next to him was his equally recognizable friend LeFou, who was sipping somewhat nervously at a tankard of cider. The third man was thin, with taut, papery skin barely covering his skeleton. He seemed as ancient as a real mummy, but there was nothing frail in the way he held himself over the fancy cordial Gaston had poured. His hair was long and back, but without a ribbon confining it, the locks strangely neat and greasy. He had all of his teeth, or a very fine set of someone else's, that showed clearly whatever he talked or smiled, which was rare. There was an odd smell about him, too. Not from him, but mesma around his clothes, his cloak, his hat, something that reminded one a little too much of dangerous chemicals, vomit, and decay of urine in years. Gaston tried to move his head away without seeming impolite. I don't usually leave the asylum during the week, much less the middle of the night, but they said you'd make it worth my while, the old man said, completely frozen otherwise. He didn't even play with the base of the glass where his yellow fingers rested. Of course, Monsieur d'Arc, Gaston said as politely as he could. He wasn't used to dealing with refined gentlemen. Not that he needed to, most of the time. He pulled a small sack of coins from his coat and tossed it on the table. At first, d'Arc looked repulsed, either at the gesture or the size of the sack. It was hard to tell which. Then he reached out with a not-so-tentative hand and pulled the laces apart. His eyes glowed with some gold as whatever he found in there, and a horrid smile formed on his lips. I'm listening. It's like this, Gaston said, as if presenting a tricky and serious situation, like the capturing of an enemy castle. I've got my heart set on marrying Belle, but she needs a little persuasion. A little persuasion? She turned you down flat, LeFou pointed out. Gaston picked up the tankard of cider and shoved it at his friend's mouth. LeFou blurbled in protest but drank. Everyone knows her father's a lunatic, the hunter continued, waving his hand nonchalantly. Be careful using that word, d'Arc said with a delicate menace. Maurice is utterly harmless. Gaston pounded his fists on the table in exasperation. He was here tonight raving about some beast that is keeping Belle locked up in a castle. d'Arc's eyes flickered and he frowned slightly. Otherwise, he had no motion. Surely he was jesting. He seemed pretty serious to all of us, LeFou said, shaking his head, going on about what a big beast it was, with fangs, and he said it could talk, Gaston interrupted, shrugging. Like a man. How very unusual, d'Arc said, leaning forward. The talking beast. Do tell more. Oh, what does it matter? The hunter roared. The point is he is insane, and Belle will do anything to keep him from being locked up. Yeah, even marrying him, LeFou said, rolling his eyes. Gaston glowered, but didn't disagree. I see, d'Arc said with a glittering smile. Well, normally I would hesitate at the whole idea of throwing an innocent man into the asylum unless his beautiful daughter marries you, even for gold, but you've piqued my curiosity. All right, I shall do it. Excellent, let's drink to it. Gaston raised his giant beer tankard for a toast, and white foam spilled over the top. LeFou held up his smaller mug of cider. d'Arc lifted his eyes down own delicate cordial glass, a glint of malice in his eye.